afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to today's webcast entitled Plateau, Fact or Fiction, Neuroplasticity Research and Ideas for Promoting Long-Term Change. Before we get started with the webcast, I would like to mention that these webcasts are part of a larger initiative, Government of Alberta initiative, called the Human Services Learning Series. For more information about this series, please check your emails for regular updates, or you can go to hslearningseries.ca. You can also follow on Twitter with the username @ABHumanServices. Today's session is also being recorded. The video will be posted on the ABII web page after this live recording. My name is Teresa Siebold, and my colleague Sarah Hartley and I will be presenting today's session. Just a little bit about me so you know who you're with for the next hour and a half. I am a physiotherapist. I have been working almost 20 years, which I'm not sure how that's possible because I'm just not 20 years older. I am also an instructor with the Neurodevelopmental Treatment Association. It's an international group of instructors with a philosophy and framework for treating individuals with brain injuries, stroke, or neuromotor disorders. I am a mom. I have 2 boys, and I am also currently working at ARBI, which is the Association for the Rehabilitation of the Brain Injured. It's in Calgary, Alberta.
And just so you know a little bit about me, like Teresa said, I'm Sarah Hartley. I'm also a physiotherapist. I studied in the UK and then have been working as a physio for the last 9 years. Anywhere from sports medicine through to the hospital, through to now I currently work with Teresa at ARBI as well in adult neurorehabilitation.
And Sarah is pregnant with twins.
I don't think you can see it from here.
We wanted to say a really quick note about the Association for the Rehabilitation of the Brain Injury because it lends itself very nicely to why we chose today's topic, which is about plateau, fact or fiction. We work in a clinic that is an outpatient-based environment, and we work with patients with acquired brain injury, so stroke or traumatic brain injury. And they have already had their acute care rehabilitation, long-term rehabilitation on an inpatient ward, and even outpatient settings. And after time passes, ARBI still believes that change is possible, and so we see patients much later in their phase of recovery from acquired brain injury. So today's session really, based on our background and the clients that we're working with right now, today's session is really about concepts that can apply to anyone along the spectrum of recovery from acquired brain injury. And it's a degree of involvement, so from very severe clients to people who are much more functional and accessing their communities in a different way. So that's where we're starting. So thank you for joining us today. As I said, the title is Plateau, Fact or Fiction. We are starting with some neuroplasticity research based on its current research, but it's actually been around for a very long time. And it's just an exciting time to live and to work in the world of neurorehabilitation right now. So we wanted to start with that, and that will feed itself into the strategies and ideas that we have to promote long-term functional change. This is a quote from a gentleman who is actually in one of the books that Norman Doidge has written. Norman Doidge is a Canadian neuropsychologist. He is an advocate of long-term recovery, long-term potential for change. Brain activity is like Play-Doh, one is playing with all the time. And what that really says to us is that the brain is very moldable, and it is based on the inputs that you give it, so that change is possible, and it's dependent on activities that you choose, lifestyle choices, exercise, and education, and webcasts like this one. So we wanted to plant that seed about the brain's activity and really define this concept or the term plateau. And so there's 2 articles that we use to lend themselves to this presentation. Stephen Page et al. In 2004 wrote an article called Recovery Plateau, Let's Reconsider This Concept. And in that, they define the plateau as being patients who are failing to respond positively to rehabilitation. So in the healthcare world, as a physiotherapist, we see that patients will, with rehab initially, there's a big learning curve and their recovery is quite rapid at first. And then they might slow down and they're still making changes, but it's just not as rapid. And then they actually kind of meet a bit of a plateau, or they level off in the changes that are happening. The other article is by Demen et al. In 2006, and they described the term as phase in stroke recovery. It was for stroke patients that they were quoting specifically. A phase in stroke recovery when functional improvements are no longer seen. So again, there's a recovery period and then they level off and their recovery slows down. Unfortunately, what happens when recovery is slowing down or people are plateauing is the response to that by the healthcare community or even the client themselves is that they slow down or stop the activity or the rehab program or the exercise. And Sarah and I are here to really challenge this and to give other ideas, options, and strategies to push past this plateau phase and really reconsider what that means. So what we're saying is the performance plateau is not necessarily indicative of the inability to experience further gains. So unfortunately, when the word plateau is used, people think it's permanent and people think it's kind of their fault if they're the patient, or they might assume the responsibility, or they think that the stroke itself is done healing or the traumatic brain injury is done healing. And so they don't see in the future, they're not seeing that there's potential for further gains. And the reality is that everyone adapts. There's this concept called adaptation. It's in the sports world. It's in, athletes seem to get it, musicians understand it. And so we wanted to talk about the concept of adaptation in the world of neurorehabilitation. So we just went to the dictionary, which, since it doesn't seem like dictionaries exist in paper form anymore, you go online and there's dictionary.com. So on dictionary.com, they defined adaptation as a decrease in response of body systems as a result of constantly applied conditions. And the constantly applied conditions, I believe, is really what is important out of that definition. So our body is comprised of many different systems: heart, lungs, muscular, joint, connective tissue, and neurological. And all of those systems will adapt in some way to any type of activity that's consistently and constantly applied. So when you have a new job, let's say you're going to a new job and it involves some heavy lifting. You might be moving boxes. Probably the first couple of days, you may feel stiff after you've been lifting those boxes. But in time, your body adapts to that. The muscles get used to lifting those boxes. Your nervous system becomes more automatic with how to use your hands, with how to squat down. Your breathing your lungs are adapting to that. Your breathing's going to start to normalize, and you adapt to those conditions that are constantly applied because it's your job. And that's called adaptation. So in the first article that I mentioned on a previous slide, Stephen Page et al., 2004, they described adaptation as a series of neuromuscular processes whereby the human body becomes accustomed to workload. So within our nervous system and our muscular system, there's a huge communication going on. And those communications and those systems will adapt based on the workload we give it. And this is for everyone. This is not just for someone post-acquired brain injury. This is for all individuals. So what we really want to challenge then is this notion of motor recovery plateau versus neuromuscular adaptation. And I put the emphasis on recovery on purpose because now what we're finding and what the neuroplasticity research is finding, and what's very exciting, is that recovery doesn't have to be finite. There's really no guaranteed endpoint to it. Recovery can continue to happen in the nervous system at the central level and at the peripheral level. Recovery can happen at the musculoskeletal level. It can happen at the cardiovascular level, everywhere. So we can't start labeling recovery plateaus when in fact we might be looking at a neuromuscular adaptation to the routine. And anyone who is in a routine becomes very adapted to that routine. So a couple of key words from that. So we all adapt to training. As I said before, consider the athlete, the soccer player. So at the beginning of the season, a soccer player goes out and he is training, retraining himself in soccer. And initially there's sprints that have to happen. There's also endurance. There's a lot of coordination. And he is challenged by this. And the first few exercise days, the first few drill days are brutal. And they're almost hard enough that some people will be frustrated by them. In time, those activities, the exercises, the drills become easier as he adapts to that, but he's still challenged by them, and he can now push himself a little bit further. And as he continues, then he becomes almost expert in the area of soccer, to the point that it becomes more adaptive, repetitive, and skillful. And that's the level that we want our patients to be able to get to as they're moving through their recovery, so that in function they can become efficient and skillful in their practice. This adaptation concept is very specific though. So consider the swimmer versus the soccer player. They have to have very different training techniques. If you want to do well at swimming, you can't play soccer. That's just it's not going to work. If you want to do well at swimming, you have to do the things that will get you better at swimming. And we tell this to our clients, so it is very important to identify what you want to do well at, and then to be able to identify the components that will get you better in that area of practice. So for swimming, every time I get in the pool, I cannot believe how hard it is to breathe. And I'm a runner. I love to run, but get me in the pool and it's like, I can't breathe. It's just so hard. So to train that, I have to specifically train within the water and in that environment. So this concept of adaptation is very specific. It's not just for the young athletes, however. Everyone adapts. I've said this before. So consider the older lady who goes for her walk, her daily walk through the park. If all she does is walk the same park, the same length of time, at the same speed with her little gait aid, her cane, every day, then she's definitely going to be good at that. She's going to adapt to that level, but she, in fact, may plateau or level off at that level and or see a little decrement. That may become boring and she might get disengaged. She might even slow down because now she's going to find ways to make that walk a little bit more engaging. So look at the bird, look at that person passing by. Oh, what a lovely day, they stop and chat. So she's going to adapt to her level of training if she doesn't change it in some way and challenge it in some way. And it's not a young person, it's based on what you do. And I mentioned before that adaptation can occur in any environment. So you're working and you have to lift boxes. It can also be cognitive. It doesn't have to be physical. So Sarah and I are going to reference mostly physical things because we're physiotherapists, so that's where our bias is coming from. But know that these concepts are really systemic. They're within the body. So if you have start to play Sudoku, for example, you initially find, I hope you find Sudoku hard, because I do, but if you initially start Sudokus and they're very hard, the more you train that, the more familiar you get with that. You start to have your own systems in place and your own ways to make sense of it, and in fact, adapt to that cognitive challenge. There are factors that contribute to this concept of adaptation. When people think of a plateau, I mentioned this before, they often think it's their injury itself that's done in healing, and or that they're not working hard enough. They might blame themselves. They're not inspired. They're just not working hard enough. And that might be true, but the reality is that there's also many other factors that contribute to adaptation. And Sarah and I wanted to address these because we feel that when you understand all the contributing factors, you might be able to start to make a list and problem solve ways to scratch those off the list as barriers for yourself, and ways that you can then move past that adaptation or that plateau. So one of the first factors is, in fact, family and friends. And this exists again for all of us, that if you are surrounded by family and friends who are able and willing to work with you, to take you to the gym, to support you, who encourage you, or are kind of going through this road of recovery with you, the research is very clear that you will do well, and you will do well for a long time. If you struggle with family and friends, unfortunately, it's a struggle to continue to push and to continue to work past adaptation. So family and friends are an influence, and I'm not saying cross your family and friends off your list, but start to identify their influence and how can you then make suggestions that will improve that, that relationship or that friendship. Financial. Unfortunately, even in Canada, we have a wonderful healthcare system. We have access to many, many programs. But the reality is that there are financial barriers. And when it comes to cost associated with programming, cost associated with transportation, I mean, even the outfits you wear to the gym, there's shoes, there's a lot of cost associated with keeping yourself going. And if you're trying to think about changing programs or changing an area that you want to work on, there could be a cost associated with that. Don't forget that this session that we're doing today is a human services session, and there are resources available to people, and so we encourage people not to put cost on their list and then say that they can't. There's social workers in the community. We work with an amazing social worker at RB. We also have a neuropsychologist, and they help our clients with family and friend relationships and with financial supports that may be possible to help you overcome that barrier of cost to your recovery. Another community factor that might contribute to your leveling off or your being stuck in a rut is the perceptions or ideas of others. Unfortunately, everyone has their opinions. Everyone thinks they understand recovery. You know, oh, I sprained my ankle, I know what you're going through, or oh, my sister's brother's cousin had such a thing, you know, and you have to try this. And so there's ideas and opinions coming from the healthcare world, friends and family, people that you bump into on the street, people at the pharmacy, and really, ultimately, what you do with those opinions is what you do with those opinions. Don't let anything become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The fact is there are very few facts in the world of neurorehabilitation. We are still exploring and learning and understanding every day what rehab looks like, what recovery looks like. And so we just really wanted to encourage people to maintain a positive attitude and to use their own judgments rather than the opinions or ideas of others. A second factor that contributes to this concept of plateau or adaptation are individual factors. So age is something that we cannot change but can identify. Children are incredibly plastic. Their systems are adaptable. They are amazingly healthy and strong and resilient, and there's no question that children can recover from injury more readily, faster, and more efficiently than those of us who are getting older. But age is not an excuse. Age is a state of mind. The evidence is very clear that even as we get older, we can continue to make changes and to make improvements in our systems. I often say to many people, my goal in life is to keep up with my kids. And this is really my goal in life, because if I can keep up with my kids, then I can mentor and model for them what health can actually be. And I am holding on to that state of mind that I'm older than them, but I can still play and I can still stay healthy. So while age does slow us down and is absolutely a factor that may cause us to reach that plateau sooner, it is not an excuse anymore. I've talked a little bit about the state of mind. We love this quote. This is a quote from Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And that is very true. So at RB where I work, I have another saying, I'm full of them. But my clients will often say, oh, I can't. When I try a new activity with them, they'll say, oh, I can't. And I say, well, that's a 4-letter word in my book. Can't is not okay. So how about trying to say, I'll try? Or, okay, that's going to be hard, but I'll try. So if you think you can't, you can't. You're not going to even give it a try, and chances are that you've just met that plateau. But if you think, okay, Teresa's a little crazy right now, but I'm going to show her and I'm going to try, then chances are you'll actually be a little bit successful in whatever activity you're trying. So we love that quote, and we think that it applies to everything in life, not just recovery. Unfortunately, depression, anxiety, fear, phobias are common, and they are a reality in terms of limiting recovery. They are not something to be taken lightly. As I mentioned before, we work with a social worker and a neuropsychologist at RB, and if we start to identify that we think depression is a barrier or a limitation, we will refer our clients to that neuropsychologist and to the social worker to be properly addressed. So if you or anyone is identifying that there is depression or anxiety or fear limiting you, medically there's choices. Emotionally and spiritually, there's ways to work within that. And again, it's not something to be taken and just say, okay, well, today's a bad day, therefore I'm not going to try. So we really want to work within the abilities and tolerances of all of our clients. And there are comorbidities. So we know that there are heart disease issues, people have diabetes, they live with arthritis. They might have had premorbid back problems, osteoarthritis in their knee, thrower's shoulder. There's multiple things that can become problematic post-stroke or post-traumatic brain injury. And when you're trying to push past a plateau phase, we have to consider those comorbidities and not be just jumping in and thinking, okay, everything's going to recover. But take them into consideration, be mindful about them, do your homework, acknowledge them, and then build them into the program and move on. The third area that contributes to plateau or adaptation are environmental or service factors. And we are very aware of limitations and accessibility issues, even within your immediate environment, which would be your home environment or your workplace. There can be accessibility issues. I had a client who, in order for him to get home, his family moved his bedroom down to the main floor, and the old TV room became his bedroom so that he did not have to do the stairs. And that is a great way to work within the constraints of their home. However, they never at any point said they didn't want to try those stairs because it was a young man and his bedroom was upstairs. So I was working with them in their home, and it took us a few years, but because they still didn't want those stairs to be their limiting factor, it was on our to-do list, and we just worked away at the components that would help this young man get better at stairs until he was able to finally do the stairs safely with his family. So the point of that is that there can be accessibility issues, but they could be temporary as well. And if you're thinking long-term and you're not believing that you're stuck in a rut forever, that those barriers can in fact not be barriers long-term. Enough said. There are accessibility issues outside of your home as well. So if you live in an area, and in Alberta we live in an area that sometimes winter months, for example, you are in your house a lot more than in those summer months. And it could be that you have buckets of snow around you, and that is limiting you from getting outside. So then we have to get really creative with ways to stay active in our body and in our minds within the constraints of the environment, and to be aware of that, but again, not to say, okay, well, it's snowing outside, so I can't today. I'm not going to do anything today. And so there's lots of different ways, and Sarah's going to give strategies and ideas about ways to build in activity and challenge and intensity within your immediate environment or your home. And the stairs, by the way, are a great place to do that. Even if you cannot climb stairs, but maybe you can do the bottom step, stairs are a great option for that. What community you live in does have an influence and an impact in your ability to continue to progress and ongoing recovery. So if you are in a community that has access to social programs, gyms, fitness centers, even community centers often have group programs and education sessions and one-to-one sessions that you can access. That will go a long way to helping nudge you past that plateau or that being stuck in a rut phase. So being aware of what the options are in your community. Not everybody has to go to a gym to stay fit. I'm not a gym person, but maybe there are parks, and maybe there are within centers. So at the University of Calgary, for example, we have an indoor walking track. Can you have access to that indoor walking track if it's snowing outside and you don't want to use the snowy sidewalks? So making yourself aware of what's available in the community, and again, if it's hard for you to do that, there are people in the community that can support you with that. So again, social workers or kinesiologists or physiotherapists that might be able to help guide that for you. Accessibility through transportation is a huge issue. Many of our clients that we see at RB are in wheelchairs, and they would be considered wheelchair dependent. So for most of their mobility, they are in a wheelchair. And so to access any kind of public transportation, you have to be able to get yourself to the bus stop, wait safely at the bus stop, and somehow get on that bus. And even if there are wheelchair accessible buses, you still have to get to the bus stop. So that's a huge barrier. So then we have things like Handy Bus or Handy Dart or whatever it's called within your environment, your community. And those are wonderful too, but then it goes back to the finances, and are you able to afford the tickets for that? There's accessible taxis, and again, there's friends and family. So the transportation issue is very frustrating, and we actually work with recreation therapists who kind of know it best. And so if that's a barrier, they're the ones that are sleuthing out ways to figure out how to not let it be a barrier, but to have some form of transportation that's safe, reliable, and cost effective. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that plateau does not have to be considered permanent. It doesn't have to be considered anyone's fault or just done in terms of recovery. We've talked about the fact that there's multiple factors that are playing into this idea of plateau, the notion of plateau. And what we want to talk about is how and why is it possible to get out of that slump, to get out of that plateau. And we like this picture. So he's stuck in a rut and he's just running on his little hamster wheel there. And again, a slump can be not just considered in terms of recovery, but it could be in terms of the new activities that you've chosen, whether it's a hobby or a job. This is a quote from Michael Merznick. He is a neuroplastician from the United States. He's actually been doing neuroplasticity research since the 60s. I had the opportunity of attending a session that Michael Merznick did in 2014. It was called the Bendable Brain Conference through NDTA. And he was very inspiring about neuroplasticity. He was very motivating in that he said every neurobiological ability is improvable at any age, but it matters how you train it. So what we're going to talk about next is the neurobiological abilities, the concept of plasticity, the ability to change your systems at any age. And what we're going to talk about after that is the how piece, the piece that Sarah is going to share with you, the strategies, the ideas, and the concepts about actually training those abilities. So plasticity defined. In 2005, Ward did an article on what plasticity means and all the different things that are changing within the nervous system. While it's a bit of an older article now, so 2005, it's still very current in terms of what he documented is changing. So plasticity is defined as the capacity to change structure and consequently function during learning or in response to exposure to something. And what that means is that structurally within our nervous system, okay, so let me back up one sec. It's easy to think of plasticity from the muscular perspective because at the muscle tissue level, you see change. You see it. You visually see it. If you want to get stronger and you go to the gym and you work out at the gym, your muscles respond and they get bigger, right? So I don't want to brag or anything, but mine got bigger. Just kidding. But you see physical changes at the muscular level, and that's plasticity. All of our tissues are plastic, all of them. So it's either we can change them for the better, which is to get stronger. But if we stop working out and we stop challenging ourselves and we start sitting a lot more or we are more immobile, our tissues are changing for the worse. So if I'm getting stronger, that's positive plasticity. If I'm getting weaker and tighter, and all the soft tissues tend to do that, they get more tight, the joints get stiffer, and I'm sure everyone has felt that, that's negative plasticity. So we want to promote positive plasticity, and we want to promote positive plasticity not just at the muscular level, but at the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system level. So from the central nervous system perspective, they used to think that the brain, the organ within our head, was static. It was hardwired. That's actually how it was described. It was hardwired. So the neurons that you were born with, you died with, that, you know, this was the visual center back here, that you had memory here, that you had sort of behaviors here. Like they were very convinced a number of years ago that your brain was hardwired and that was that. So if you had damage to the brain in that area, that was that. But now they know, and in fact one of the books we'll reference later, the brain is actually soft-wired. There is lots of things happening structurally with learning and challenging that allow us to improve our performance and to improve our function. So you actually have parts of the brain that new neurons can grow. And they didn't believe this before. There's really specific parts of the brain where new neurons can grow. You have parts of the dendrites and the synaptic areas that can grow, they can change, they can shift, so that communication within the brain is improved as well. So they don't think of the brain as being static and hardwired anymore, and that's good news to us in the rehab world, because now we want to get at making those changes within the brain, so structural changes, but we have to make them in a way that they stay permanently to improve functional performance. So I have that quote down here, the brain is constantly changing. And it is. So even right now, your brain is changing, hopefully for the better. But right now, your brain is undergoing some synaptic influences. There's electricity happening within there. The brain's changing is very competitive. And this has been called recently competitive plasticity. So if you are learning to cheat in something, so for example, when you're trying to put your coat on and you don't have access to certain muscles in your shoulder or your arm, and it's really hard to put your coat on, so you start to use your mouth to do that, right? So you kind of hold on, you're pulling things on, you're doing it in this different kind of way, call that maybe cheating or compensating. So if you're learning to do that, then that compensation, that cheat, is what's going to get stronger. You're retraining and learning every time you practice that, that whole pathway for cheating, that whole tooth and neck and hand and good side kind of pathway is what's going to get stronger. Unfortunately, what that means though, is if that's getting stronger, something's getting weaker. And so the thing that's getting weaker is probably the less used side, the side that was weaker after the stroke or the brain injury to begin with. So the strong gets stronger, and unfortunately the weak gets weaker, because the brain isn't going to waste space. It's just going to use that learning and strengthen what's practiced. Hope that makes sense. So the good news around plasticity is that there's like 90 billion plus neurons. I have no idea whose job it was to count them. That's a big job. But there's like 90 billion neurons in your nervous system. That is a lot of potential for change. And that doesn't speak to the connectivity of those neurons to each other. There are billions of pathways, trillions of pathways to connect within the brain and then communicate to the rest of our system. And starting at very young ages, those pathways are getting strengthened or weakened based on the input that we give them. Remember that concept in the beginning of this webcast. So based on your behaviors and your actions, you're either strengthening or weakening those connections, strengthening or weakening those neurons, but there's a lot of potential for change. Plasticity does not just apply to neurons. I mentioned this before. So muscularly, you can change at the tissue level. Cardiovascular-wise, if you start to do an endurance program, there will be changes to your heart and to your lungs, but also changes at the peripheral level of blood flow. So changes to blood flow to the muscles that are being used, and changes to blood flow within the brain. And this is a really positive thing. There's a lot of research now to show that strength training and endurance training bathe the brain in a really healthy state for learning, so that it's getting lots of good blood in there, lots of oxygen, and it's helping to flush out neurotoxins and other chemicals, maybe some inflammation that's in there secondary to the stroke or the brain injury. So doing even a few minutes at the start of a program, so even if you have a cognitive program where you're working on memory and learning, learning games, things like that, even at the start of a program, if you do a cardiovascular warm-up, it actually will improve your learning. So you want to bathe the brain in all this good stuff. The good news is also that attitude, environment, the healthcare team, your friends, your family, caregivers, everyone around you and the environment that you're in, these all can influence you towards positive changes. So they don't just have to be, as I said before, contributors to adaptation. Those people surrounding you, the environment surrounding you, and your attitude can actually nudge you past being stuck in a rut, being a barrier. The research, there's a lot of research now that's actually looking at systems in the brain in emotional centers. So the limbic system, the amygdala centers of the brain, and those systems, if we can tap into those to make you happy, to make you feel good and positive, your potential for positive plasticity improves. So music therapy is a very good example of this. There's a lot of research supporting music therapy because you can, many people have favorite songs and will go back to a memory, a favorite time or day, and that gives the brain, it like primes the brain with positive neurochemicals and blood flow that then readies it for the state of learning. The opposite is also true. So if you are in a depressed state, an anxious state, a frustrated state, or an angry place, your brain is not ready for learning. The plasticity changes are going to be slower if they happen at all. And so it's very important, and I think it behooves us as clinicians to look at ways to nurture our clients and make sure that we're doing programs that are enjoyable. They don't have to be fluffy. They just have to be enjoyable, meaningful, and engaging for the clients, because learning happens faster, it happens more readily, and it actually is more resilient to degradation. And something that Sarah and I are very passionate about, and it's partially because we've been at RB, and it's also the clients that we've seen long-term. Plasticity is long-term. Nothing makes us happier than when clients defy the odds, or they can go back to someone who said, well, you'll never walk, or why would you keep working so hard. I had a client who, one of her friends actually said to her, I don't know why you keep trying to walk, you'll never walk. And rather than letting that be self-fulfilling, long term, she was 2 years post-stroke, she was able to go back to her friend and walk in and say, yes, I can, and I did. So the reality is change happens, and it can happen long term. Jeffrey Klein is another neuroplastician. He's actually Canadian. He is working out of the United States right now, but he is a very good PhD, but also man that wants to link the clinical community with the PhD world of research. So I feel like he's kind of bridging that gap, because unfortunately we have all this research going on in the PhD world, and then we have all this clinical stuff happening in the community, and we need to merge those two worlds together. And I feel like Jeffrey Klein is going to help us do that. So he's a neuroplastician, and he talks a lot about the future of rehabilitation has to be in the communities. We have, our population is aging. We have more and more and more people living longer, and we have more and more and more people because we have an aging population, but we also have more toxins in our world perhaps, or more stresses. Who knows? There's a lot of factors contributing to it, but we have more people living with disability after stroke and brain injury. So we can't keep having the same model of rehabilitation, which is only in an inpatient setting. We have to think long-term, and we have to move it out to the communities, whatever that community might be. So he talks a lot about the most powerful driver of neuroplasticity and change is, in fact, behavior. And so it's the behavior of the people that are surrounding you, but it's the behavior of you as the recovering person. So if you don't do it, if you don't participate and engage in some way, in some activity, you won't get plasticity. It's not good enough just to dream about it and visualize it. The act of doing is the trigger for plasticity. So we stole from Nike and just that concept of just do it. But that's actually not really true, so we cross that out and we say, well, really, it's how we do it that matters. So the understanding that just doing it can be very repetitive, it can be boring and disengaging, and in fact, you may find adaptation and plateau. So how we do it is really what Sarah's going to talk a lot about in terms of pushing you past, challenging yourself, challenging those around you. That matters. So within Jeffrey Klein's article, there was this, he's got 10, I call them, I don't think he does, I call them ingredients for positive plasticity. There's 10 areas that he identifies that contribute to changing your brain and changing your peripheral nervous system and systems. We are not going to talk about all 10 of these today. At the back of this webcast, you will have access to all of our resources and references, and this is a really nice article for anyone who is interested. Jeffrey Klein, 2008. So just know that there is not one ingredient for plasticity. I know that there's a ton of research out there on repetition. And yeah, repetition is in there. Repetition is one ingredient that's important, but it certainly is not the only ingredient. So you could do 100 reps of squats and really never get better at doing stairs. Okay? So there's also that concept of specificity, and I talked about that earlier. You need to choose to work within the goals, to work with activities that will focus on moving towards your goals. So there's many concepts and ingredients for positive plasticity, and in the next section, we are going to talk about integrating those concepts and how you can kind of pull from each of them to really develop your own program that's long-term and will challenge you for change long-term. So this is a performance time curve. I actually just made this up this week, getting ready for this session, because I'm a very visual learner, and I started to kind of see this as making a lot of sense in terms of recovery. So initially, you see that you have a pretty stable functional performance after you've had an acquired brain injury, stroke, or TBI. Once we inject a new activity or program, there's a sharp learning curve and things start changing, particularly in the early days post-acquired brain injury. So while you're healing and everything is new and you're fresh to rehab and the activities are encouraging and you're motivated because you just want to get the heck out of the hospital, there's this steep learning curve. And then it actually starts to level off a little bit. And in fact, once you've done that rehab program for a period of time, you may start to see that you're not as engaged anymore. You understand the program, your performance is leveling off. In fact, it might dip down as you get bored, as your therapists perhaps are running out of ideas or tricks in their bag for you. So there might actually be a little dip there. But if you inject something new, if you change something, and Sarah's going to talk about all the things that you can change, you will start to see those nice blips and improvements in your performance again. So the key here is to change something. And again, I have another saying, but if you don't change something, nothing's going to change. So you really need to figure out what area in those key ingredients or what contributing factor to that adaptation can you cross off your list to move beyond. So while we are big advocates of long-term recovery, while we're big advocates of long-term programs, community-based or outpatient clinic-based, there is no recipe for success, and I want to be very clear on this. Sarah and I are not here to give anyone, if you do X, you will see Y. The reality is every single person has their very own issues and impairments. They have their own strengths. They have their own assets. So what you need to build for yourself is your own unique plasticity program. We don't want to call it exercise. I don't love the word exercise. In fact, literally, sometimes when I introduce myself, I've had people say, I'll say, I'm Teresa, I'm a physiotherapist, and I've had a lady say to me, oh, I don't like exercise. And I don't like hearing that because it doesn't have to be exercise. It actually can be an activity. It can be recreational. It can be a hobby. And you're still going to see change if you do it a certain way. And so it's the how. But what we're not going to give you is the exact recipe for that how. So we're going to stop here for any questions, and we don't have any questions or comments at this time. So I'm going to let Sarah come in and take over, and she's going to discuss the how part to this program. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to write them in. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Okay. So just like Teresa said, next we're going to discuss some of the ways of putting those ingredients of positive plasticity into practice or into your routines. And I generally start with the goal setting piece. So in all aspects of life, it's really important to know where you want to be going and what you want to be striving towards. And so to figure that out and to decide where I need to be is really hard to do without setting those goals. The first line here is about setting logical goals, which is probably one of the most challenging pieces about setting goals. And that's a real delicate balance about the goal being realistic, but still challenging. We definitely end up talking to people about not just setting a big end goal. So by a goal being realistic, it needs to be attainable. I have a gentleman at the moment at RB who wants to run a marathon. So you talk to people about goals as soon as we meet them. What are we working on? And at that point, he wasn't running at all. So I was like, oh, okay, so you want to run a marathon? We need to start by perhaps running in the hallway. Maybe we'll go for a 5K before we're moving towards a marathon kind of distance. So that's what we have here about setting goals, small goals that are attainable, and you can still have that end goal, but let's see if we can take some bite-sized ones to work towards first. Another thing that we'd like to just say about goals, sometimes when you have to set those mini goals, is that they're not always as meaningful as that end goal. So someone who wants to get back golfing again, golf is the drive to doing this plasticity program, to doing the exercises or the activities. But sometimes improving your walking endurance, for example, or improving how you swing is how you're going to get to that end goal of golf. So what we have to try and remember is that these mini goals that might not be exactly what you want to be doing at the end can become more meaningful because we know that they're leading us where we want to get to. So this is kind of us coming into these plasticity ingredients that we have here, that they do need to be specific to the sport or the activity, just like Teresa described, but they do need to be meaningful for you too, and they'd still need to be challenging. Always document that goal if you can. I think it's good to have those kind of washy thoughts about what you want to do and where you want to go, and identify what it is and write it down. And then once you have that goal, tracking where you're going with them is really helpful. So we can talk a little bit now about how you might be able to track those goals. So just like Teresa was talking about the lady who walks in the park, she's walking at the same speed every day. So you can definitely consider how long it took you to walk that block today. And if your goal is to speed up a little bit, maybe tomorrow we're trying to cut that by even a few seconds. How long did you walk for? Maybe you're not looking at speed, but you want to go for longer. So maybe instead of that one loop through the park, you can do a little extra on the end, double it if you're feeling ambitious. Number of repetitions is a great way to track kind of progress that you're making. How many can you do that day? Can we increase it a little bit? And we'll talk a little bit more about this moving forward. If you have a target, I want to do the stairs twice today. How many times this week did you hit that target? Did you go up and down twice in the day and kind of check that off your list? The other piece, we always talk about friends and relatives and kind of discussing how they can help our recovery, how some relationships might be hindering it. If they can help you, even in an exercise way, in a competitive fashion, then definitely use that to your advantage. Here we've ripped a little picture from the Fitbit world, which I think has increased that competition level and kind of really pushed people forward to strive towards those physical goals at least. So if you can compete with a friend or a family member for something you're working on, then why not use that? We do love our checklists as well. Again, you kind of get washy about what you want to do and how you're doing it. You can write it down, and sometimes just having that written down can make you accountable for where you're going and what you're working on. So you can see here we have someone who's looping around the living room so many times a day. They might be doing those few little stairs. If stairs is what you want to improve at, like we said, the specificity is important to do that activity. Even just standing at the kitchen counter, people don't often perceive standing to be an exercise, but if you are wheelchair dependent or at a lower level of mobility, then getting up and standing there a few more times a day is a great way of building that endurance. This is the kind of thing that I use. I think weeks can fly by and you haven't done the exercise or the social activities or different things that you've been hoping to do that week. So pull yourself up a calendar and kind of write down, plot out what it is that you want to do. It doesn't always have to be the gym. It could be an art class. It could be walking around a mall. Perhaps on here you're doing golf once a week. Try and track that with a calendar to make you kind of accountable towards that goal that you're setting. So all of our tracking examples you've seen are showing you kind of various activities that are being repeated multiple times a day or a week. And we're talking about making those mini goals so that you can get to the bigger goals that you want to achieve. Repetition is one of those key ingredients for positive plasticity that Teresa kind of showed you on that chart there. And we kind of see that explained here, that for the structural neural changes and for your performance functionally to change and for that change to be lasting, to be maintained, you do need lots of repetition. We never want to forget that, just like Nike said, it's not necessarily about just doing it, but it is about how you do it too. So if we can repeat lots in the best way possible, then you're going to get further along the road to success faster. We see this again. This is just a little dictionary internet search too to show us that practice is defined as repeated exercise in or performance of an activity or skill so as to acquire or maintain proficiency in it. So that repetition in that practice is how you're going to make those structural functional changes lasting, which is what we want. This concept of repetition is definitely supported in the research too. You can see here a little chart that we have that compares some different studies. In the animal studies on the far left there, you can see the amount of repetition that's required for change to occur. And then unfortunately, we see some other studies, and this, I'm just going to talk it briefly, is kind of goes through upper extremity strength, leg strength, and walking as well. And in these areas, we're just not hitting the number of repetitions that the research is describing that we need to be. So I think even when we think we're doing as much as we can, it's really an exponential amount of practice that we need to do to acquire those skills. Teresa talked a little bit earlier about how you don't necessarily have to go to the gym from an exercise standpoint to build practice, build repetition, to kind of use those skills that you want to improve to get there, really. There are lots of opportunities for that kind of working out concept, and whether that's physical exercise or cognitive thinking, you know, there are things that you can do around the home or within your community without having to go to something structured. So we like to look at these two ladies. Obviously, we presume one's either in the gym or is in a workout kind of zone, and the other lady is doing the same motion in a different environment. So standing from a chair, we've talked to our clients a lot about this being a really similar motion to a squat. So you can do 100 squats. You can also get up and down from the chair 100 times, and you're doing a very similar thing. So instead of getting up from the chair and walking to the kitchen, can you stop yourself and do 10 of those, do 20 of those before you go to the kitchen to try and build in a little bit more intensity and a few more repetitions to what you were managing before. It's the same thing, for example, for someone who has an ankle injury who's doing, you know, standing on one leg balancing work at the gym. You can still be doing those small exercises or activities at home, just trying to think about how you can weave those mini goals into your day can often help you to kind of achieve them more easily. It's the same thing. One other example I have for that perhaps is someone who wants to get back golfing, and you go to the driving range and you might do putting there. Is there an option for you to get a little putting green thing at home and do a few in the backyard? Like if transport and accessing the environment is difficult, to try and get creative to think about how we can make it more possible within our environment. And that's the same, I think, for acquired brain injury, for any injury, for anyone really. It's really hard sometimes to weave it into your day. So we have to get creative with that. Physios generally, I think, have this 10 or 15 repetition rule. Like we provide exercises. Perhaps other therapists have a 10-minute rule, I don't know. There is no magic in the number 10. For some people out there, especially for some of our clients that we see, it's really hard to get out of the chair once. And then this physio is asking you to do 10. And you're like, well, that's just not attainable for you. So there is no magic in what we're saying with repetition. If you can only do 1 and that's a struggle, next time can you try 2? Like you've doubled your repetition by doing that. By doing it that way, your repetition can add up throughout the day. Just don't think about challenging having to be an exponential amount more, but it could be a little bit more often. And then just like we said, you can adapt to that if you continue to just sneak those repetitions in and gradually add up what you're doing. This little one we use, I think, a lot in physio, regardless of which type of injury you've had. It's really easy to forget that little extra thing that someone's told you to do. It's the same in sports. I want you to stand on one leg, or I want you to do this exercise 3 times a day, and I ask people to stick up a Post-it. can you put a Post-it on the bathroom mirror so that when you're brushing your teeth, you're like, oh, I was supposed to do those one-leg squats. Or when you're walking out of that hallway into the kitchen, there's a little Post-it that says, walk a loop of the living room now, so that you stop what you're doing and try and add in a little extra activity that you weren't doing before. These are the little pieces of how you can add that change to kind of fight that plateau that we're describing. And you can also use technology here. There's little reminders you can set on your phone or your watch to say, what is it that I need to remember to do? Because if it's important to you to work towards those goals, then, like I say, finding a way to weave it into your day or into your routine is important. These little reminders can be anything, especially in the world of acquired brain injury. Often in what we see in recovery is that people kind of get used to not using one side or not doing something because, the path of least resistance is to do it a different way. So these little reminders that I've been talking about are really focused in on what it is for you. They're individual and how's it going to help you. So stick that up on the table next to you so that you use your hand when you're eating your meal. You can put little footprints on the floor. A lot of our clients tend to stand shifted to one side. And then by doing that, they're building in that plasticity to get stronger on that side and weaker on the side that we need to improve. So standing equally when you're in the kitchen or when you are brushing your teeth, or any little piece that you think that it will be helpful to do or that someone recommends you do is a good cue. The hand on the counter is a good one for if you have a kind of weaker arm or hand that just needs a little bit more contact with the surface or needs just a little more input in a day-to-day time and space. So there's our little handprint on the counter next to you on the kitchen, and when you're making food or getting something, then there it goes. We're going to move on a little bit to what challenge looks like. So I said before that you can definitely change repetition and set goals that are challenging for you, but realistic, not too difficult. We have a little rate of perceived exertion chart on here. We often pull this out for our clients because for us to really be challenged and for you to be working hard, you do need to be in that kind of middle zone where you are slightly breathless, perhaps a little flushed. You might be sweating a little bit. You should be feeling some kind of muscle burn. And it should be tiring if you're working at that challenging level. There is, again, research out there that tells us that I think 25% of the time our clients are in that zone where they're working. So we're always striving to get into that sweet spot where it is challenging and it's not too difficult, but it's also not too comfortable. So definitely think about that when you're in that zone.
And I just want to add to that there is now a collaboration between the heart and stroke. So cardiac surgeons and neurologists are partnering to really say it's okay to work hard. It's not detrimental. And I think for a lot of clients, there is a fear around challenge and what that means. But like Sarah said, the reality is if it's not hard, it's not driving change. It's not making plasticity happen. And so the heart and stroke worlds are getting together, the cardiac and neurology worlds, to really tease out how can we keep it safe, but push yourself hard enough to be a driver of change. So like Sarah was saying, you actually should be working hard. And sometimes clients will say, but it's hard or I'm tired. And we say, good. That's good. Because if you're not tired, you didn't work out. And you're working with us to work out. I don't go for a run to just, lollygag around. It's actually the hard part that drives change. So I just wanted to really reinforce that for everybody, actually. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
It does make me think actually about a client who was in his program a couple of weeks ago, and he was asleep in his chair at the end of the morning. And I looked and I said, take a picture of that man because he is exhausted. And he was safe, he was fine. It just really made us see that, we do want to work to that degree. and we don't always manage it, even in our own exercise. So we do have to push towards that. That leads us into this little quote here that we love. There is no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. So on any one of those goals, I think anyone who's working towards a goal it's not usually easy, and like we say, it's not supposed to be easy. It's usually a bit of a hard road to get to where you want to get to, and if it is, then good, because you are going the right way about it, and you're more likely to get to where you want to get by doing that. Here's our other little one from Jack Canfield. If we are not a little uncomfortable every day, we are not growing. All of the good stuff is outside of our comfort zone. So this is the person who says, oh, that Teresa or that Sarah is a little crazy. She wants me to do what? And like, it is always to push you outside of that comfort zone a little bit. If it's too easy, then chances are we're not getting where we want to get, and we're not pushing into that plasticity that we need to. I always use this ad lib to say, I don't necessarily like talking in front of people because it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So by doing it, there you are coming out of that comfort zone, which is not a bad thing, especially after. You feel better. We've talked a little bit about friends and family and whether they can be supportive or less so sometimes. And I'm going to reiterate here just that use those resources to your best advantage. So if you can and do have a little bit of a supportive family who can help you towards meeting some of your goals or towards exercising or working or whatever it is that where you're going to. So that can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be a support worker. Sometimes people have support a couple times a week to help them to do something, or even in a community center if you're accessing one, or a day home center. If you have that support there to help you, then try and access it and use it to your advantage. We do see that we have more motivation and we have more fun when we are being active with someone. That's where that competitive piece comes in, or it's an opportunity to be social with someone, but also to work towards what you want to do at the same time. Here we have bowed arrows giving us a little internet quote. Whenever you're working out with someone else, the intensity is always going to be greater than when you're alone. And that intensity piece is just one of those positive plasticity ingredients that we want to tap into whenever we can. This is another speak to the family piece. Sometimes our family, especially in acquired brain injury, and our caregivers are really helpful, and that's kind of their role to play. So this is us asking either the patient, the client, or the family member, ask yourself if you're being a little too helpful sometimes. Sometimes when we meet clients, the first time we meet them, we ask them to do something and we don't help to begin with, and we see if they can do it. And families say, oh my, I've been lifting those legs in for months. And we say, yeah. So the next time, just see if someone can do that thing for themselves, to see if you can reach for some of that independence, which is often a goal. People like to be as independent as they can be following injury. When this is the case, you definitely do need patience, and I think sometimes it's easier to help someone, so let's consider if it would be helpful to them to have a little patience and give it a little extra time and see if they can do it for themselves, then try that. We always have a little segue here into your individual goals. We have some of our clients who would prefer to get help with some day-to-day things like dressing because they want to save their energy for their walking or their stairs, if that's their kind of thing that they really want to work on. So although it's good, sometimes detrimental to be helpful, really kind of know the client, patient, family member and know what their goals are. And if they want to preserve that energy, then fine. But if their goal is to be independent sooner in anything they can, then give that time and try and let them do it. I know Teresa's spoken a bit here and there to the staying positive piece, so that plasticity is really more effective and, well, is successful if we can remain positive. If we're in that negative space where our mental state isn't optimal, then we're not getting the results we want. So just as she said before, we like to replace can't with try, especially when you're trying to change something, add something new, something that you might think is really difficult. Always consider that on a low day, everybody has low days, and staying positive on a bad day for anyone in any injury, or even all of us, is really difficult. So take the low days and move forward and strive for the good days. It's not always about what you're doing too. We like to take a little note just to talk about sleep and about diet. Obviously, a lack of sleep and a poor diet can really impact your brain health and your attitude as well. So do consider healthy sleep routines and a balanced diet as part of your recovery. We have a few resources up here. I think Teresa's spoken definitely to the soft-wired one on the left here. The others are books by Norman Doidge, who we've talked about a little earlier too. All of these resources are kind of surrounding that neuroplasticity topic that we're talking about today, and also about like succeeding against the odds, especially Norman Doidge's books, kind of the brain doing some amazing things, which we've said we've seen. And so sometimes reading resources like this can be helpful for you to try and stay positive and move forward regardless of where you are in your recovery. This is probably one of our favorite slides for today. If you fuel the journey on the opinions of others, you are going to run out of gas. Steve Maraboli. We've referred to opinions of others at different points here, and like I say, it's about sometimes taking some of those opinions with a pinch of salt and pushing forward with the ones that are helping you to stay positive and helping you to move forward in your recovery or in your goals. Easier said than done sometimes, but still good in there. Lending to that positive mindset is almost all of the success stories involve a combination of mind and energy, and that's Michael Merznick in 2014. The positive mindset and the energy and staying motivated towards what you want to do and where you want to get is a vital ingredient to that recipe to success that we kind of relayed earlier. We have one more little piece here from Michael Merznick, which is just about promoting brain health. I've talked a little bit there about diet and about sleep and about staying positive. So he's kind of echoing this. Be mindful of what you're doing and how you're working. Try to stay positive however you can with using those resources that we described. Being social when it's helpful for your recovery is beneficial. There comes the eating piece in there. Always adding in the challenge, even when it feels like you can't work any harder. Try and keep going if it's where you want to get to. Adding something new when you are stuck in a slump or a rut is very helpful, as long as it's specific to where you want to be going. And then consider the environment that you're working in, or that you're exercising in, or that you're trying to attain these new skills in. If the environment isn't helpful, if it's too busy, if there's a lot of stimulation happening, then reconsider where you are working or where you are in your space and change it if that's going to help for that plasticity piece in your mindset. I think I'm going to step across and you can come in for a link.
I just want to go back to Michael Merznick's "Be Mindful" quote. When he spoke in Las Vegas at the Bendable Brain Conference, he said, "Be mindful." And one of the things he talked about was walking on the grass. And I really took that. I walk on the grass now. So if I'm going to go for a walk or if I'm going to go for a jog, wherever possible, I choose to be on the grass. The mindful piece is that be aware of your surroundings and your environment, but also be aware of those little opportunities to try harder or work harder. So a walk on concrete is a very different entity than a walk on grass. And so now if I'm going for a walk, I try and pop up on the grass, and it's amazing how different it feels, how multi-systems are being used in different ways. So the opportunity to be mindful presents itself all day in small ways. So like Sarah said with our Post-it notes, we will often put a Post-it note on the fridge that says use right hand, so that that's their affected side. When they're reaching for the fridge, rather than going with their left hand, they're being mindful of the fact that reaching with that right hand, potential for recovery and getting over that little plateau is there. So those mindful opportunities throughout the day to promote recovery. So we wanted to do our summary of concepts. So as you can see from today, we are encouraging people to start thinking about it more as a physiological adaptation to a constantly applied circumstance. So whatever it is that you're doing, if it's consistent, if it's constant, you will adapt to that, and all of your systems adapt in a very specific way. So the plasticity program that you build for yourself, we don't want to call it an exercise program, because it could be a cognitive, it could be sensory, it could be motoric. Those programs are promoting plasticity. They need to be ongoingly challenging, as we said before. They have to be hard. So if it's not hard, it's not worth doing, in some ways. There's maintenance, which is fine, but if your goals are bigger, then it has to be challenging. Consider new environments we talked about. Interval training is, I love interval training. It's something that we will often use. So we have a walking group, for example, and in that walking group, rather than just walking at the same pace, the same duration, you can walk faster for 30 seconds and then longer strides for 30 seconds and then comfort pace. So there's lots of ways to think about interval training. Like Sarah said, a sit to stand, maybe you do 4 kind of little sit to stands without hands. Maybe if you're used to pushing off the chair with your hand, now you're going to try a couple without your hands. So think of ways to inject intervals in your day, kind of almost shock the system a little bit out of its rut. The goals are crucial to promoting change, and really activities that are new, so anything that is relearning or new learning is actually a good place to be. It's promoting change within your brain. And meaningful activities we cannot underestimate that. So really start to think outside the box of exercise, because if you understand that doing this reach for the fridge is going to mean that I can now reach, to brush my hair and groom myself in a different way. There's a whole new meaning to it. So we strive very hard to provide programs that are meaningful to our clients. And it's not that if someone comes to me, for example, I have a young man, I'm actually going to use this conversation that happened on Tuesday of this week. I have a young man that started at Arby, and one of his goals is hockey. He got up to the juniors. He's a very good hockey player. And I can't necessarily play hockey with him. We would struggle getting him on skates right now. It's summer, we don't have an ice rink around our building, even if we could get on skates. But I can look at the components of hockey and work on the components, and to him, that is meaningful, it is motivating, and he will work harder. So if you find the right activity that's meaningful for your clients, they will actually stay with you, work harder and longer within that activity. So this is just a conversation that we had on Tuesday, and I thought it was really timely, so I added it to this. He said to me, this is hard. And it was, I had broken down a bit of stick handling and shooting the puck we have a hockey net in our physio gym. He said, this is hard. And I said something like, I know this is challenging for you, but it's also good for you. It's working on your strength and your balance. It's working towards your goal of hockey. Can you keep trying? And he said to me, yeah, I'll keep trying because it's hockey. And as soon as he said that, the therapy assistant I was working with and I were like high-fived each other, because it meant we had his engagement, we had his motivation, and he was willing to work really hard. And he understood that even though he wasn't on the ice and he wasn't playing hockey, he was building the components to work towards his goal of hockey. So with that, this is kind of like the end of our webcast, but it's really the start of maybe a change in thought for you guys. Do we have any questions, Eric? We do. Awesome.
Yeah, so we have one question that's come in, and it is a hypothetical. What if the client goal is way off base in relation to the person's abilities? How do you coach realistic goals or achievable goals?
Okay, that's great. You want me to start? So that's a great question, and in fact that comes up often, like Sarah's marathoner kind of thing. Two comments I have around that actually is our job as rehab practitioners is not to inject our belief systems on our patients. So if they have that goal, they own that goal. That's the reality, that's their goal. But we really don't want people to be unreasonable in that goal initially, especially because it can be a bit detrimental to the program. They can get really frustrated quickly. So a couple of things that I would say, I think Sarah can add anything at the end here, but one is that I always say to people, I love that you have that goal. I love that because I think that's going to keep you working hard and striving for that goal. So we need to hang on to that goal, but we need to put it over here for right now. So whether it's in a parking lot or just in the back of your mind, don't let that go, it's your goal. But in order to get that goal, I kind of want to outline other specific areas that are working towards that goal, but in a more incremental, reachable way. So around the goals, I'm sure people have heard of the term SMART goals, which is like specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, I think is how SMART is defined. So we want to be smart with our goals because they have to be challenging enough. They have to still lend themselves towards what the client wants, what they're aiming for. So, for example, my hockey player, I don't know if he'll ever play hockey. That's the fact. I don't know if he'll ever play hockey again. I can't tell him he'll never play hockey again because in our world of neuroplasticity today, I don't know. So the fact is that right now, I can't get him playing hockey, but I can break down hockey to balance activities around, standing with a stick in his hand, to upper extremity activities, to handling the puck and the stick, to perceptual scanning activities. So I'm still injecting my therapy needs and working on his impairments without losing sight of his ultimate goal. And at no point would I guarantee that he's going to play hockey again, but he will be invested in his plasticity program if I allow him to hold on to that goal. Did you want to add anything?
No, I was just going to kind of reiterate that explaining why we do what we do sometimes is hard to always do. I think, we kind of strive forward with a program that we think is going to be helpful to a client and lose sight of explaining why we're doing what we're doing and how that is lending to get towards that final goal, even if it's not there right now. The only other thing I was going to say is when there are other factors, it makes me think of a gentleman who had a lot of neuropathic pain, who actually changed his goals, to be honest, when he realized how much he was going to have to go through to get to that end goal. And we had a conversation after we'd been working together for a while, and I said, I cannot say that you're never going to walk. However, this is what we've found from what we've done so far, and it helped him to work through getting there himself.
And I think too, if you use their main goal, so it's running a marathon or it's playing hockey again, if you use that main goal, but the components of it, if they're struggling to walk, but they want to play hockey, then you say things like, in order to play hockey, you probably need to be able to walk to the bus and then carry your hockey bag, walk to the change room. So you actually need to work on walking as a component of hockey. And people get that. They understand that. What happens though is if we say to somebody, you're never going to walk or you're not going to play hockey, unfortunately it can become very self-fulfilling and they might start to put up their own resistances to working with us and to working with whoever has injected that opinion. So I love what Sarah was saying around our clients actually will change their goals as they move through their journey of recovery. They will alter their goals based on where their experiences, and I don't think we actually need to do that initially. We can just decrease them, maybe make them more incremental and smart, but the clients will start to change their goals as they move through their journey. No more questions? Okay, great. So that brings us to the end of our webcast today. So thank you very much for joining us. Again, I want to reinforce that this is Human Services, Government of Alberta Human Services Learning Series, and this is actually the last one, I believe, for the summer, so they're taking some time off. If you would like more information on the webcasts, please go to, you can email, first of all, abii@gov.ab.ca. So it's ABI, the Alberta Brain Injury Initiative, at gov.alberta.ca. So that would be the email to connect with. You can find that this webcast has been recorded, and others like it have also been recorded on the website for you to refer back to. So if you have any questions, please email, or any further insights, or you want to investigate a little bit, please go to the website. And with that, we will say thank you and goodbye. Good.